The 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court in a crucial ruling allowed subclassification within SC/STs so that more reservation benefits could be given to the more backward classes. The top court has held that scheduled castes cannot be considered homogeneous classes and that it would be permissible for the centre and states to earmark most backward classes within the SCs and STs. The court in its ruling has also made a significant recommendation to states and the centre. 4 out of 7 judges have stated that creamy layer should be made applicable to SCs and STs too. At present, creamy layer provision exists only for reservation benefits under the OBC category. Justice B.R. Gavai in his judgment has stated that marking the creamy layer within SCs and STs alone can achieve the real equality. 3 other judges expressed similar views. The ball at the moment is in the court of the centre and state governments, since these are only recommendations from the top court. The BJP has welcomed it, with former Vice President Venkaiah Naidu saying that this will pave way for real social justice.
This will lead to the real social justice and will pave way for taking care of the suppressed people. This is not against any community. It is, after all, a proportionate reservation, paving way for the real social justice.
However, NDA ally LJP struck a different note and expressed disagreement with Supreme Court's ruling on subclassification within SCs and STs.
ये जजमेंट जो है वो बहुत फेयर नहीं है, क्योंकि जो रिजर्वेशन का आधार था वो आपका क्रीमी लेयर, नॉन क्रीमी लेयर, अफ्लुएंशियल ये था ही नहीं. तो अब आप उसको जाकर के ये जो सब डिविजन्स क्रिएट करने का प्रयास है कि नहीं शेड्यूल्ड कास्ट एंड शेड्यूल्ड ट्राइब्स में हम लोग सब डिविजन्स क्रिएट करें, दैट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. तो हम लोग सब जो सरकार में हैं, हम लोग सब न्यायालय को अप्रोच करेंगे. यशस्वी प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी को हम लोग अप्रोच करेंगे.
India Bloc meanwhile claimed vindication and said that to ensure subclassification, caste census becomes all the more important.
We have to understand that through a caste census, their incomes and direct our welfare schemes on the basis of their incomes. Those who are the weaker section of the society, those who are the disempowered section of the society will only come out once we have the caste identities as well as their income identities. How will you identify a non-creamy layer? Only when you have your income details, right? So those are things which will only come out when there is a census that is happening. I'm surprised that the Supreme Court has not yet mandated them to have a census. That is also the need of the hour. It's long pending, and which is probably also impacting our welfare policies and schemes for the poor.
Any kind of subcategorization shall be meaningless until or unless you have the substantial data, and that only you can get through caste-based census with a socio-economic context. I'm concerned about that without caste census, how would you know who stands where, who has reached where? I think you have to look at the origin and the destination. Then only these kind of subcategorization shall work.
And creamy layer concept.
I mean, creamy layer is an idea. I think we all should revisit in the context of what is happening today.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, let's take this across to our guest. Joining us, Dr. Anand Raghunathan, author, is with us. Manish Barrier is a political analyst. Tehseen Poonawala continues from debate number 1. Suraj Jengde, author, is joining us. And Dr. Suresh Mane, advocate and president of the Bahujan Republican Socialist Party, is also with us. Suraj Jengde, let me start with you. This is what the court has said. The court, and Justice Gavai, I'm just quoting him, he's quoting Ambedkar from what I've read. He said that they've already reached a stage where on their own accord they should walk out of special provisions and give way to the deserving and needy. I may gainfully refer to history shows that where ethics and economics come in conflict, victory is always with economics. Do you agree with what Justice Gavai and several of his other court judges on the bench have stated today? Suraj Jengde.
I would rather go with the dissenting opinion of Justice Bela Trivedi, who had really pointedly pointed out that there's no, I'm paraphrasing that, the edifice that you're trying to build is something that really did not existed before. So the Supreme Court is trying to build on something precedents that has not existed before. And so in this case, though the emotions of this in the sense of economics and ethics going through, we have to look at in kind of two justice mechanisms. One is moral justice, another is redistributive justice. Now, in the model of redistributive justice, it does make sense. We need to have as many groups who are not justly considered to be part of this kind of a coverage of the schemes and the policy that the law is going to give. But also, what remains very particular is the subclassification that has really brought us into this kind of stalemate of the situation that we currently have. Now, subclassifications is not just existing among scheduled castes or scheduled tribes and so forth. And oftentimes, these are looked at as a binaries, especially the dominant kind of numbers of castes that are existing across India. Now, if that is the case, subclassifications, I beg to start from what 1931 census did, which is to give the classification of each caste from across the kind of Varna hierarchy. The Brahmins, as we know, 1931 had nearly 1,632 subcastes. And based on that, we can then look at how distribution mechanism works.
No, Suraj, I don't think there's any doubt. The court has made its mind very clear when it comes to subclassification. So I don't think there's even a debate there at the end of the day. The issue that comes into contention is what happens with the creamy layer, because the court hasn't given an order, it's a recommendation. Whether the center accepts it, doesn't accept it, we don't know yet. But let me bring in Dr. Ranganathan, because Dr. Ranganathan, the contention from those who are opposing this particular recommendation, you just heard Suraj Yengde, is that who's to say that someone who is economically prospered may not be discriminated on the basis of caste. Just the social, positioning, where the person stays, etc., the criteria that have been observed by court might not be enough to ensure that that individual or that family, etc., are not discriminated against on the basis of caste. Dr. Ranganathan.
Good evening, Madhav, and good evening to my fellow panelists. In my limited reading of the judgment, I think it's a good verdict, one that is logical and rational, simply because there is no one strata of underprivileged caste. There is a gradation of it. Every person belonging to the SC, ST and availing the reservation is not socially and economically deprived at the same level. So it makes sense to have a quota within quota so that benefits of reservations can go to the most underprivileged class amongst the SC, ST. Also, the Supreme Court directive that there should be a creamy layer in the SC, ST quota as well is most welcome, because there was no creamy layer criteria. The benefits of reservations were not filtering through to the most deprived of our Dalit community. Now, hopefully the Supreme Court will also look at how the OBC quota is divided. I talked here very briefly of the Rohini Commission report that found 97% of the reserved jobs and seats go to only 25% of the OBC subcaste. And only 10 OBC communities have taken 25% of reserved central jobs and institutional seats. 37% of communities under OBC category had zero representation in jobs. So we also need to put an end to appeasement done by the politicians and political parties when it comes to dividing the OBC quota. Finally, as far as reservations are concerned, beyond the hypocrisy of every political party, I have 2 points to make very briefly. Number one, as was reinforced by Justice Pardiwala and also none other than the Chief Justice of India and also Mr. Prakash Ambedkar, the grandson of Dr. Ambedkar, that even Dr. Ambedkar wanted reservations for only a limited period of 10 or 30 years. Why do our present crop of politicians not have the guts to implement that? And finally, as I said, if giving reservations is a moral obligation, and it is, then why are reservations excluded from certain domains and sectors, the prominent among them being the judiciary? Why do the judges suddenly think of merit when it comes to appointing their own, but think of quotas when it comes to appointing doctors, scientists and other professionals? Is that not hypocrisy itself? Only 3% of judges, High Court and Supreme Court judges are Dalits.
Let me bring in Dr. Suresh Mane on some of those questions. You've raised many questions there, Dr. Ranganathan. But Dr. Suresh Mane, the question is this. If there are, of course, differences in levels of economic development when it comes to all of these communities, whether it's SCs, STs and other categories, the question then arises that shouldn't those who are the most economically backward amongst them naturally gain a priority?
Yes, absolutely. Your question is right. Then my answer is, why don't you have the subcategorization in a EWS quota? EWS quota is without any subcategorization. That is the point number one. Point number two, creamy layer is not a ruling in the present matter. Just it is an observation. It is called as an obiter. It is not a ratio. So it is the opinion given by the court with regard to creamy layer. Creamy layer principle has been turned down by the parliament also earlier. So creamy layer here is not even a ruling of the majority. Even I have the judgment of two judges first, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud and another judge. It doesn't say creamy layer. Creamy layer mention is made by Justice Gavaiya and other two others. But it is the obiter in law. It is not a ratio. So it is not a law.
Yes, it's a recommendation. We are saying it's a recommendation.
The divorce from its 2005 judgment.
No doubt, sir. We are saying it's a recommendation. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
But is it not a valid one?
So it is up to the parliament. Yes, it is. No, then it needs to be examined because this judgment of the Supreme Court is without substantial data. In all the matters pertaining to the constitutional reservation policy, Supreme Court itself have emphasized time and again on the research and on the data, empirical data. Now the judgment is delivered without any empirical data. There is no empirical data even to suggest the subcategorization. Yeah. And there is no even empirical data with the applicability of the principle of creamy layer. I heard carefully Dr. Ranganathan. Dr. Ranganathan, 10 years, Dr. Ambedkar's suggestion was with regard to the political reservation. That we should know and we should read thoroughly. We should not here distort the Ambedkar's name. That 10 years period was limited to only political reservation and not to the reservation in education and employment. That needs to be corrected. And secondly, when the Supreme Court delivers the judgment on categorization, whether there is a subcategorization applicable to all other cadres. Even in an open category, the jobs are hijacked by the particular classes. Now, how many people are ready to admit this? It is the open quota, but it is monopolized by few castes.
I just want to go one by one, please.
To apply the subcategorization?
Sir, Dr. Mani, you have raised a question on Dr. Ranganathan. I want him to quickly respond and then I'll go across to the two other panelists who have not yet spoken on this. Dr. Ranganathan, quick clarification. Quick response.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Dr. Mane because I really admire his erudite offerings. 3 points to make. Number one, when he talks about there is no subcategorization of EWS, by its very nature, the categorization is EWS. So there is not a gradation, but some people, all people who are below an economical strata are to get reservation. So that itself makes it a level playing field. Number two, when he talks about lack of empirical data, can I please ask him, by that logic, the Mandal Commission recommendation should not have been taken in because there was no empirical data. The census records was of 1931. So are you against the...
Sorry, Ranganathan.
So, please,
Mandal Commission.
Okay, let him conclude his point. Dr. Mane, let him conclude. You can respond to him. Quickly, Dr. Ranganathan, I have to go across to others, please. Quickly, please.
Yes, I did not interrupt him. The Mandal Commission said 27, on basis of that, 27% OBC quota was there on the basis of 1931 census. So where was the empirical data that is now being used almost a century later? So please, let's talk about logic. Now, third point, which is a very important point. I quoted the Chief Justice of India and the grandson of Dr. Ambedkar. So let Dr. Mane confront the grandson of Dr. Ambedkar as far as...
Okay, Dr. Mane, very quickly, please, because I have very limited time. Very quickly, please, quickly respond to Dr. Ranganathan. Dr. Mane, would you like to respond to Dr. Ranganathan very quickly?
No, Ranganathan's suggestion with regard to the OBC, yes, OBC reservation quota was based on Mandal Commission report. Here the subclassification permitted by the Supreme Court without any empirical data, without any report.
Based on 1931
so it is a law, but the practically it will be very difficult to implement. And it will be difficulty faced by the center as well as the states. We should not admit.
Let me now bring in other panelists as well. Manish Pariyar, Bihar government has released a caste-based survey last year, and this has very clearly stated that poverty was highest amongst SCs, STs, the data has revealed. There's also the argument as far as creamy layer is concerned, it was being held as valid despite reservations. There are instances of discrimination. Reports of several committees, including the Thorat committee, the Mungekar committee, have acknowledged discrimination and exclusion as far as marginalized community students are concerned. And thirdly, the 2021 data of the same central government under Education Minister Ramesh Pokhriyal had revealed that SC, ST, OBC students' representation, for instance, in PhD programs of various science institutions are poor. Now, given these three data points, is there not a strong case to be made for this? This is a question that is being asked.
So good evening to you and good evening to all the panelists. See, I would say that, what you are saying is absolutely correct. But before that, I would like to add something which today in one of the judges actually said about subclassification. He said it is to be justified by quantifiable and demonstrable data by the states which cannot act on its own whims. So, the gentleman before me was talking about that there is no empirical data, but the judgment says that you bring empirical data, and if it is actually backed by that data, then you can actually do the subclassification. That's one. Second, if you look at the political scenario in Bihar and some of the other states also, I think this has been a complaint of many of the communities. So without naming them, I would say that some of the communities and some of the political parties have taken birth purely on the basis of, on the dissent, that there are certain communities who have hijacked OBC reservations, and within SC/ST also, they felt that some of them have not been empowered politically. So it's a question of both political representation, which has not happened among SC/STs, and among jobs, as well as in educational institutions, especially among OBCs, which is why this Rohini Commission is something which Dr. Ranganathan talked about.
Yeah.
Starts making.
Manish, I just want to come in because we just have a minute left. There's a very quick question. 75 years after the Constitution, we have a situation where reservation has been implemented. Surely this would have benefited some within the community. Of course, Manish talks about certain communities, those who are, for instance, in government service. There's an observation that, for instance, can a child of an IS, IPS or civil service officer be equated with the child of a disadvantaged member of a scheduled caste community studying in a Gram Panchayat school in a village? There are obviously huge gradations, and there are issues over here which require urgent attention for those who need it the most.
I bow down before the Honorable Supreme Court. I take responsibility for what I say, and I absolutely disagree with this judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court.
Recommendation
of the Honorable Supreme Court. Why? Only children of judges will become judges. How many SC/STs are under Supreme Court till now? And let your viewers Google fact it. How many High Court Chief Justice today are from the SC/ST community? Let me go one step further and say, how are you going to do this without a caste and economic census, which the government of India does not want to do? But the most important thing on the EWS quota, and this is where I want to end. We know what's happening in the EWS quota. These privileged people go on 6 months, 8 months unpaid leave, show their income below 8 lakhs for that year, and they take reservations there. Those who come on television and wax eloquence against reservation are actually manipulating the system. And how many have gone to jail? As many in the Prime Minister's press conferences, zero.
Reservations in itself is a very complex subject. Today, our discussion was primarily focused on the creamy layer observations that were made. What decision the government takes remains to be seen, and whether they will support, oppose, etc. All of these are big questions that still remain at the moment. Dr. Ranganathan, Manish Barrier, Tehseen Purawala, Suraj Yengde, and Dr. Suresh Mane, thank you so much for joining us on debate number 2.